thank you so much for everyone joining. It's so great to meet all of you and to see all the great interest there is in going into the industry and all the various aspects that you can go into. And, I know there's been plenty of motivational stuff out there right now, but don't be discouraged. I mean, human connection is such a big part of our everyday life, right? I think we can all feel that we're obviously very isolated right now. So, bring the meetings industry will come back, and I think it will be bigger than ever. There obviously will be changes, but, I think you're all in a very great, career trajectory, and there is a lot of great things to look forward to. So with that, we have some fun topics to talk to you guys about in terms of global meetings and events. As EJ introduced, so my name is Brooke Davis. I am the Vice President of Operations at Global Access Meetings. So we are a full service meetings and events company, and we primarily work in pharmaceuticals, but we've also worked in a variety of industries as well. So, I've been in the industry for going on about 10 years. I was able to join under my mother, who owns our company. And I started working with her and helping her as like a travel director on some of her programs, both domestically as well as internationally. And so I loved seeing the execution of it, but I obviously had no idea what the planning side was like. And so that really enticed me, and wanted to follow in her footsteps. And so I joined her team 10 years ago. And so we've been, growing our company ever since. And, how I got into more doing global meetings, it was pretty organic. I mean, we were supporting various clients with their domestic needs, and as they grew, so did their business and their needs, overseas with the various countries that they had headquarters out of. So I got an opportunity to plan meetings all over, and still do, and absolutely love it. So, it is in a very exciting industry that has a lot of promise and a lot of great opportunity. So, yes, I want you guys to keep that in mind. So, and then I'll introduce you to Laurie, who is our Director of Meetings and Events. Laurie?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. And I'm so glad to kind of be seeing you, but hearing about what you're doing, what you're studying, and what your goals are. It's so exciting. I'm Laurie Turpin-Soderholm. I'm with Global Access Meetings, obviously, Director of Meetings and Events. And so I got into this through the theater. My background was in the theater. And I eventually made my way into festivals and events. And I know a couple of you have mentioned festivals. From that area, I moved into corporate events. And then I became a travel director, which I did for 10 years. I traveled pretty much 300 days a year for about 10 years. I had the incredible privilege of being able to travel to about 50 countries. I worked on 6 Olympic Games and just had an amazing time, learned a lot about cultures and people and myself and how to solve problems, because when you've got things happening on site, you've got to figure it out. We've probably all learned that by now. So just an incredible career. But what was great for me was being a travel director really trained me to plan meetings from the end result and back into it. Like, I know what it needs to be, the finished product, so I know now what I need to put into it. So for me, that was really, really great training. And I've just had an amazing career ever since. I've thoroughly enjoyed everything I do. And so that's my background. So we kind of wanted to start talking to you about cultural differences and considerations planning globally. because it's incredibly rewarding, we find, to plan these programs internationally. As I mentioned, the experience you'll get, the people you'll meet, you'll know some of them, forever. Make these great friends, and you just learn these cultures, and there's so many good things about it. At the same time, it's really challenging. And it doesn't matter what country you go to. I've had challenges in Canada. So it doesn't matter what country you're in and how different the culture is, you're still going to have some challenges. But at the end of the day, the key is, doesn't matter how hard it is, doesn't matter where you are, you've got a client and they have expectations. And you've got to meet those expectations and solve those problems and make your client happy. So that's the challenge and the fun. So we want to talk to you today. Brooke and I put this together so that you can see the different stages we feel go into this, and really pointing out to you what we feel are the areas that need extra attention. This could be a semester-long class, but here's how we feel that these are the points that you really need to pay extra attention to. And this is based on our experience. So just giving you that little heads up. So the first stage, of course, is sourcing. You need to find your property, right? You probably all know there's this thing out in the world called VAT, value added tax. And it depends on where in the world you're going, whether or not it applies. For purposes of this presentation, we'll talk mostly about planning in Europe. Asia is different, and I suspect Dr. Kang has told you quite a bit about planning in Europe. In Asia, I'm just assuming that, but we'll touch on a little bit of Asia in here, but mostly we're going to talk about Europe. So there's this thing called VAT. Unlike room and occupancy taxes in the United States, which are always separate, in much of the world, it's included in your room rate. And it's something to just be conscious of. And so when you're doing the sourcing, it's something to ask. Just make sure that that's true. Also, your meal room. Americans usually like to have a separate meal room. And in much of the world, that's not the way that it's planned. So you need to ask that in advance and just make sure that everyone's expecting the same thing, and you're all on the same page. Breakfast in Europe, certainly in Europe, is usually included in your room rate, and most European hotels, depending on the quality of the hotel, will have a pretty spectacular breakfast buffet, and it's included in the room rate. But again, when you're sourcing, it's one of those things you just want to double check and make sure. General session rooms. A lot of times, again, European hotels, if you don't specify that you need the room held 24 hours for you, they might go ahead and book another group in that room at night. And I've seen it done where they want to clear out our entire meeting with all of our production, everything, and have another group go in there and have a dinner. So something else to just be very, very conscious of. Now, we're not really going to go into pharmaceutical meetings on this because, again, that could be a whole nother course. But we do a lot of pharmaceutical with our company. So if you are going to be doing a pharmaceutical meeting outside of the US, there are very particular things you need to pay attention to. And everything from the number of stars at the hotel to how much you're allowed to spend on the guest room and the meals. Again, totally another topic, but we're just going to say, if you're doing pharmaceutical, more that you have to pay attention to as well. Also, one thing to really think about when you're sourcing, look at holidays that might be occurring during the proposed dates. You're not usually going to change the date of your meeting because there's a holiday, but you might have a hard time finding hotel rooms and meeting space if there's a major holiday going on in a particular country over those dates. It's just something to be aware of and tuck in the back of your mind. Next thing we're going to talk about, DDR. This means daily delegate rate. And in the US, we do have something similar if you go to a conference center or a conference resort. a lot of times they'll offer a conference rate. And what this does is it's a per person rate per day, and it includes the meeting room rental for your main meeting room, your plenary or your general session room. It'll include very basic AV like a screen, a flip chart, a projector. Very basic, but it'll also include your coffee breaks, your AM and your PM, and your lunch. We'll come back to talk about lunch with a DDR, but it's very convenient to have these rates because when you go to budget, it's so much easier. And there's a lot of things just taken care of for you that you don't really have to think too much about. Again, we'll visit that when we get to food and beverage. In the UK, they have something called the 24-hour rate. I've not seen it anywhere else. It's everything that's in the DDR, but it also includes your guest room and group dinner, and it's usually a plated dinner. For a lot of groups, they like that. Again, it's two more things you don't really have to think about. Now, one thing you do have to consider when you go outside of the United States is the sleeping room categories. In the US, we tend to have single rate, double rate, but they're pretty much the same. That's not really the true in much of the world. You'll have a twin room versus a double room. And it's usually based on the number of people who will be in the room and the number of beds who are in the room. And part of that has to do with the cost of the breakfast that we talked about is included in the room rate. So depending on what kind of program you're doing, if it's a meeting where people are just, your delegates are just coming in, they're going to the meeting, that's it. There's no roommates, there's no guests. You can pretty much go with single or twin rooms. If you're doing an incentive where it's going to be couples, you'll have to go with doubles, or kings are very difficult to find in certain cities, older cities in Europe with older, more grand hotels. You may not find king beds. So you'll have to really pay attention to those things. There's a lot of options. Just to pay attention to it. It is different than in the US. Now, the last thing I'll say on sourcing is if your client has the budget and you can do a site inspection, it is always going to be to your benefit to get there, see it for yourself, iron out any details or issues or potential problems. It's always going to be best to do it before you actually sign the contract. Okay. Which brings us to contracting. So contracting in international hotels is a little bit different from US contracting. And I don't know how many of you have actually seen a hotel contract at this point in your career, or if you've seen BEOs at this point. But we'll just kind of walk through it briefly. But every country really kind of has their own style of contracts. And that could be too based on whether or not it's a chain like a Hilton or a Hyatt or Marriott, or if it's an independent or it's a local chain. They're going to be different. But for instance, in some countries, they'll actually include the contract details in a BEO, which we would never do in this country. They're completely different documents. So you might have what's called a terms and conditions document. And that's not customizable. It won't list your group name. It won't list your number of attendees, your number of rooms, your room rate. It won't list any of those things. It's very, very standard. But all of your details are going to be on the BEO. And we have an example of that we're going to show you momentarily so you can see what I'm talking about. You also just need to be very conscious of the number of attendees before you sign the contract. Because in this country, we typically have an attrition clause in our contracts that would allow you to drop a certain number of guest rooms or attendees by a certain date, right? And hopefully you've learned that by now, maybe you haven't. In many other countries, they don't do that. So just be very, very conscious of the number of people, because that's going to affect your rooms, your DDR, if that's what you're using. Something else to pay attention to. Then make sure that you understand every single thing in the contract. You've got to read every word, as long as it is and as difficult as it might be. And sometimes you'll have to have that translated to English. I've had to have that done as well. But even when it's in English, you may not understand it. I've had contracts in the UK that I couldn't understand what they were talking about. And I've had to just pick up the phone and call them.
Did we lose you, Laurie?
Yeah,
Oh,
right. Yeah, it's on.
Okay, now I'm okay. Thank you. You're always best, I find, to just pick up the phone, call someone from your hotel. I always find it's easier to attract bees with honey than with vinegar. So just start that personal connection with your hotel, and issues you can just solve once you have a personal connection. And also, if you're using a chain, like, again, a Hilton or something like that, you should have an NSO that you can work through if you have any issues that you really can't understand. But just make sure you, before anyone signs that contract, you understand all of it. So here is the example that we were talking about. This is actually a 3-page BEO. Again, I don't know what your experience is, everybody on the team, in the class, I should say, with BEOs. This looks very standard to what we would have in the US. It lists the room, the setup type, the number of people, it lists the food, and here you can see, by the way, this is a Hilton in Liverpool that I used a couple of years ago. And it just shows very basic food in the DDR. It shows very basic AV and setup and all that kind of thing. But as you get farther into it, the second page, Brooke, thank you so much for doing that. You can see it actually lists the number of bedrooms that we were liable for. It lists the room rate, it lists the VAT, and then onto the next page, it actually gets into the DDR costs, the number of people, and our billing. Oh, as well as the room rental. So it just makes it more complicated because, again, you have to read every page, every word, because you're going to be liable for this once you sign it. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about food and beverage. Brooke?
Yes, thank you. So as we all know, the food and beverage is going to be indicative of where you are. And so that also means the menus. If you're using a DDR, typically the menu is you're given what you will get. And so it's not going to be like selecting from different type of cuisine packages like we have here, whether you want to do Mexican one day or Asian another or Italian in one day, Italian another day. So they are going to present you with one menu. And so as a planner, it is your job to make sure that you understand everything that's being served, and that if you have any attendees with dietary restrictions or allergies, that those are addressed. So when they do sit down, everybody will have something to eat. In Spain, typically the main meal is always going to be a meat. So I would always have to find, a way to have a vegetarian option. And typically they like to do it, directly for those people that would need it. And it's always going to be normally an extra cost. So again, it's just stuff that you need to pay attention to. And then, your restaurant option. So this goes back to sourcing. Do your clients want a separate room for lunch? So do they want it privatized, or are they okay more on a casual public feel and doing it in the restaurant? A lot of buffets in Europe tend to be standing as a standard set. So again, if you want that lunch hour where everybody is sitting and you're in your own room and own space with your own buffet, you need to specify those things up front and make sure that that expectation is known, or else you're option may be in the restaurant sharing a buffet with another group, but then you just have a side private for your attendees. So again, some things to think a little bit further on when it comes to the lunch, especially when it's included in the DDR. Then we've got coffee presentation. So I know we're all, used to being able at a conference to have a coffee from the minute it starts at 8 a.m. until it closes at 5 p.m. We have those continuous beverage breaks that are very important for our attendees. Well, again, when you are overseas, typically you get 2 coffee breaks included in your DDR, but they're normally only 30 minutes in length. And it is just, coffee service at that time with maybe some light bites and some soft drinks. So, it's really your job to ensure that if you need a continuous coffee break, you make sure to order that. And it's going to look a little bit different. I know for all of my international meetings, I normally would order an espresso machine to be either, on my break outside the meeting room or inside, however you have it set. So my attendees at their leisure can go make themselves a coffee. It's also very important for those who are, coming from overseas and, struggling with jet lag. I mean, that's always a big thing to make sure you have that caffeine for attendees. So again, it's important that you know your audience and that you're making sure that they're going to be accommodated for what their needs are. And so their coffee urns are not our big standard ones that we have. They're small and they just pour a couple cups. So have those conversations with your CSM and ask them, what is their typical coffee break? How can we accommodate, all day, making sure that you can have some soft drinks on consumption throughout the day. Again, thinking through what do I normally have in the States that my attendees like, I need to figure out a way to have that over there. So, and then also the expectations of, the sizing, right? So we have, our next slide that will show you some, European portions versus American. So very much smaller. Obviously it's espresso. You don't have the huge American coffee cups, but again, if your attendees want American coffee, finding a way to get that for them. I know, Laurie, your experience in Vienna with the teacups. Do you want to mention about that?
Yeah, many years ago, I was doing I think it was a meeting or incentive, I can't remember, in Vienna. And the hotel brought out the coffee break, and I think I was pretty new. I had never been to Vienna. And there were these gorgeous, beautiful little teacups all set up, just so dainty and lovely, and a server standing there with a pot ready to pour. And the cookies were these itty bitty little tiny, little bite size. And I said, well, this is an American group. They're going to expect American coffee in large cups. And we worked our way through it. But I think everybody actually kind of enjoyed the little teacup that day, but we managed to get something larger for the next day. But the cookies that's the way they do it. You're not going to get that giant chocolate chip cookie that we have in the United States. They just don't do that. But you have to know your you have to have expectations, and you all have to share that and know what's going to happen. Again, no surprises. So.
Right, exactly. So just being mindful of that, and again, setting those expectations with your attendees, but knowing what some hot buttons may be and seeing what you can get done to accommodate their needs. Mm-hmm. So then stage 4 for meeting setup and AV, a big part of the execution for your meeting, the successful execution of your meeting. As we talked about in sourcing, is really making sure that what they're proposing in your room size for your room size is actually going to fit your meeting needs based on the type of set that your clients are expecting. So, you know, what they call cabaret, we call crescent. Europeans also tend to set a lot of classroom style or theater. So, you know, they can fit much more in many more people in smaller rooms with that. And so you need to speak up to say, okay, if I'm going to be needing a room for 50 people and we want it crescent, that looks a little bit different if I'm doing classroom or theater. So again, making sure that you are very clear in your communication of what you want, and if that means sending them a diagram or having them do diagrams for you, so your communication is succinct and everybody is on the same page. So because we will show you an example of when it went wrong. Your AV tech, you know, having somebody on site that can speak English and can work with you to make sure that everything is set up to your specifications. You know, a lot of the properties overseas do not just have PSAV in-house. They are either, you know, small in-house companies, or they contract with outside AV companies. So sometimes ordering in advance is what you need, and you can't just last minute request another lapel mic or, you know, or handheld. So again, really having to have that communication with the hotel and what their capabilities are. Also, making sure that you test the room and the AV before your client arrives. I just had a horror story in Rome where, you know, we were at a 5-star hotel. So we were at a really, really high-end hotel. You know, they had a small AV company in-house, but everything that could continue to go wrong with the AV just did. And, you know, we kept bringing them in earlier and earlier each day, so there wasn't a sound issue, and it kept exacerbating itself. And so, you know, it was just another reminder that whatever you can do to either set the room the night prior, even if it may incur a small fee, if you've got a big meeting kicking off the next day at 8 a.m., you want to make sure all your equipment is working to perfection and everything is set so you do not wake up with any surprises. That also goes for your presenting laptop. You know, programs aren't always the same, whether, especially, you know, if you're using Microsoft versus Mac, you don't want to rely on ordering a laptop through the hotel AV company and not having some of your fonts show up or some objects or images not coming through correctly. So to save you a lot of headache and hassle, I would just highly recommend bringing an extra presentation laptop and that being dedicated for the duration of the meeting. And then lastly, of course, plug adapters. I mean, hotels keep a lot on hand, but I just think it makes, you know, you as a planner, you know, shine a little bit more by showing how prepared you are and providing that for your attendees. If they do need an adapter, also knowing the difference between a converter and an adapter and when you need to use them. I mean, most computers are dual voltage, so you just need the adapter, but, you know, some appliances, hair dryers, whatnot, you have to have that converter as well. So again, coming as prepared as you can be and making sure that, you know, you really think through all the AV and meeting set well in advance. So no surprises. We do not like surprises as meeting planners.
Correct.
So we do want to throw this question out to you guys. If you can just look at this photo and tell us what you think is wrong with it in terms of the setup. I don't know. People can.
I think everybody's got their microphones turned off, but
would you make it a little larger, please?
I'll have to X out to make it look. Oh, here we go. Here. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I think the curve has to be in the other side, the way the table's set up. to me, the straight line supposed to face towards the attendee.
We're seeing other great things. So thank you.
Yeah.
So the main thing we did want to point out with this is the number of chairs at this tiny half moon. Your attendees would be so uncomfortable sitting here for 8 hours a day listening to a presentation. And where was this again, Laurie?
This was in Amsterdam. And when I had requested cabaret for a group of, it was probably 60, they sent me this. And well, first of all, they sent me the room and I said, I'm sorry, I know the calculation and I know that this number of people will not fit in cabaret in this room. And they said, oh, no, we'll send you a photo. And they sent me this photo. And I look at this and I say, well, 2 people are going to be somewhat comfortable at each half moon. 2 people can maybe write on a small pad, and 2 people might be able to get an elbow on the table. There's no way they're going to be able to take notes. So we would never do a setup like this in the United States. As this style table, we would use a round and set it with 6 tables at a round and call that crescent. This, obviously, we didn't use this hotel. There was no way this was going to work.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, Laurie, that there's a lot of old buildings with unique architecture.
Yeah.
Are those buildings exempt from ADA standards or fire safety
Linda Latham
regulations?
Is now exiting.
Those are great questions. ADA and fire are very different depending on the country that you're in. A lot of hotels in Europe are, again, if they're old enough, they're going to be grandfathered out of a lot of those kinds of regulations. And that's something you would want to work with individually with those properties. In fact, some hotels in Europe will not allow you to actually have a clothes iron in your room because it's a fire hazard. The building is too old. We never have that problem in the States, but you'll have it in Europe. So that would be an individual thing, but it's a great question.
Thank you.
I have a question. So for this setup, is it also, would you be concerned that there aren't any clear aisles for evacuation?
Absolutely. This is jammed. This room is absolutely unacceptable for this style. There's no way we'd use this. Great question also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's why, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of tools online where you can, really double check the measurements that they're giving it to you in. Obviously, it's going to be in square meters rather than square feet.
Right.
So do the conversions and then compare it to some of the spaces you've already used, or that if you just know some of the square footage. Again, there's a lot of tools online where you can check out, okay, how many people can actually fit in this? So you really know that it's going to be comfortable. You can always make a larger room more intimate. You cannot make a smaller room bigger. Right. So, having more space, especially if your meeting tends to grow, it's always easier to work with. So just don't go with what they suggest to you. Push back if you need more space. And if they don't have it, then you may not be able to consider that property because again, your clients are trusting, your expert opinion in sourcing and, and understanding the meeting space that's being proposed.
Yeah.
All right. So now doing some fun stuff while you're abroad.
Yeah. So we like to, try to bring in the local culture as much as we possibly can, depending on, what we're doing and the client, of course. We were in Munich, I think it was a year or 2 ago, and this client really wanted something very, very German at a dinner. So we went to a big beer garden and we did Bavarian Olympics, and it was so much fun, and everyone had a great time. And then I think it was the following year, we had the same group actually near Maastricht in the Netherlands, and they wanted again like a really local, great team building activity. And we found this one, which is sword fighting. Now, you would never be able to do that in the United States for liability. There's no way. But in Europe, we did. And this guy actually was a fight master from Game of Thrones, which was a really big deal. And everyone had a great time. And they had, I mean, it was just crazy fun. And then the next one, this was another group pharmaceutical, but they were they were medical oriented people in the pharmaceutical. They weren't salespeople. And we were going to Edinburgh, and we found this spectacular venue, the Surgeons Hall, which is a part of the museum. And we did a murder mystery there. And it was just so much fun for medical people to be at the Surgeons Hall. Unforgettable. So always good to try to bring in the culture. And then we've got a couple of other fun examples on the next slide, and we're going to hope the video comes through. So we had a group in Dublin, and for their final night, we were at the Guinness Storehouse, and we provided an Irish flash mob. Oh, good. So, you know, as we know how flash mob works, I mean, they were all the servers, and halfway through dinner, they became dancers, and they brought people up, and it was a phenomenal way to end the meeting. And then I believe it was the following year, the same group, we were in Liverpool, which of course is, you know, Beatle land, right? It's all about the Beatles. So for the final day of the meeting, we did a team building, which we created a choir, and we brought in a choir director, and we divided everyone into their various choral sections and spent an hour training everyone. And then they sang a, you know, iconic Beatles song, A Little Help from My Friends.
I mean, you think that's a professional choir group, right? Not just a bunch of sales and marketing, you know, attendees at the pharmaceutical. So,
and that's how we ended the meeting, on this crazy high note, where they literally said to me as they were walking out the door, "Laurie, what are we going to do next year?"
Oh
my goodness.
Great.
Yeah. So now we're at the point where we're preparing the program. We're almost ready to go on site. What do? Well, communicate. Mm-hmm. I always feel like you can never be too detailed. You can never give too much communication and information. Information, we're only as good as the information we have. So just communicate with everybody, all your vendors. Make sure you put it in writing. It's understood. If there are diagrams, like Brooke said, you include diagrams, photos, whatever you need. Just make sure you've got it all. Because again, you're trying to make sure that your clients' expectations are not only lived up to, but exceeded. So we never want any surprises. We want to make sure everything is handled. And just be proactive. Make sure that you're thinking through every detail. What could possibly go wrong? I know that's hard, but that's what we do. One really important thing when I say communicate, let me just back that up a tiny second. Be very cautious of using American slang and phraseology, because quite often you're in another country and someone is translating what you're saying, and they're translating it literally word for word. And here's a great example. A friend of mine was in, I want to say it was Hong Kong. It was definitely in Asia, but I want to say Hong Kong. And he had this big, beautiful final night dinner, really spectacular event and a live band. And then they were going to have an awards ceremony, a very formal, beautiful affair. And he was walking through the flow of the evening with the banquet captain beforehand. And he said, okay, so let's just make sure, we're going to clear dinner. We're going to serve dessert. As soon as we serve dessert, I want to kill the band and move on to the awards. Well, imagine this poor man translated that completely literally. He almost had a heart attack, and he thought they were seriously requesting that they kill the band. So, just be very careful. Don't make those mistakes. As kind of humorous as they are later on to tell the story, that it wasn't so funny for that poor banquet captain. So, so just be very careful when you communicate. And then things like print and signage. Keep in mind that in other parts of the world, paper may be a different size. Yeah. Everything may be different, right? Signage is going to be different. So there are websites out there where you can easily convert those sizes, like your signage. I always use a local print company versus dragging signage with me from the US. There's just no point. It's cost prohibitive and there's no point. So I'll either have my hotel or my DMC hook me up with a really good local printer. I'll be in communication with them, emailing my documents to them, making sure it's correct, making sure that we both understand what is a foam core sign. I've gotten on site before and had a rolled up poster that's the sign for something, and I've had to tape it on a flip chart because we thought we understood what foam core was. Just be very, very cautious of those kinds of things. Be sure you communicate. And then shipping, just limit what you have to ship for so many reasons, part of which is customs. And that has to do with not only any print you send could get caught, it's going to be expensive. Any gifts you might ship, try to buy them locally because, again, they're going to get caught going in. And then also anything you ship back could get caught in customs here. So just try to avoid shipping. Brooke and I like to bring our own supplies on site with us. And basically our rule of thumb is if it's really important and it can't be replaced easily, just put it in your carry-on. Don't even put it in your check luggage if you can avoid it. Things happen. In fact, Brooke will tell you a story in a second about something that happened to her. But I also feel like always have cash on hand too, because going back to those print shops, first of all, keep in mind a print shop in, outside of the US is probably going to close at 6 o'clock on Friday. They're going to open maybe at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. So they're not working on the weekends. And guess what? They probably don't take credit cards either. So, there are just all these reasons to plan in advance, have cash, carry what you can on site. Brooke, do you want to tell the story about the...
you learn from your experiences rather than say mistakes, right? I was coming from one program and going to Barcelona. So I checked everything, I didn't want to carry a bunch on. And, I was fortunate for that program. I was able to fly business, and your status does not matter on how quickly they get your bag or if you will get your bag. So they lost my bag. I had all my name badges in there. So I had a ton of meeting materials. I had no extra clothes. So when I'm landing first thing on Monday morning, I'm now going into town to buy myself some clothes, get whatever makeup I can find, and then come back to the meeting to get ready for my welcome reception. The added unnecessary stress with that is just, it's too much. So, always just kind of maybe expecting the worst to happen, then you're prepared if it does go wrong. because you want to be able to start as fresh as possible when you are traveling overseas, and there's a lot on your shoulders as the meeting planner. So yes, bring it on with you, pull one of those rollers or use a carry-on bag, and then check another one of stuff that if it got lost, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So always important to have as much on your persons as possible.
Yeah. Sadly, yeah. So now we're on site and we're running the program and we're getting to know the country and the hotel and the people and everything. And you're really going to benefit if you will do a little bit of research on the country, the customs, the culture, the norms before you even go. I always find it's best to even learn a few phrases in whatever language that is. Most important, hello and thank you. If you can at least do those kinds of things, you'll be looked on so much more kindly. Like you're coming there and you want to respect them and be a part of where you are. Also, really good to know, what is the gratuity situation in this country or in this city? If you get in a taxi at the airport and you're going to the hotel, do you need to give a gratuity to the driver? Is it expected? Is it not expected? Is it a straight 10% or 5%, or are you rounding up? You're going to be a lot happier and more comfortable and confident the more you know before you get there. Also do things like, we mentioned earlier in the sourcing, research holidays. Go a little bit deeper. Find out if there's going to be anything going on while you're there. Maybe there's going to be a parade that shuts down streets. Maybe there's just a festival of some kind that's going to get messed up everywhere and mess up your hotel. I mean, you never know. Just find these things out. Find out what time are shop hours for all the shops in the area. In much of the world, there will be certain times of the day that they close down for an extended lunch. In the Mediterranean, it's kind of a siesta. Different countries do it differently, but find out. And in some countries, everything is closed on Sunday. You'll want to know this beforehand. And certainly, you don't want to be the one on site. An attendee comes up to you and says, oh my gosh, I just found out all the shops are closed tomorrow. And you didn't know. Again, no surprises. You don't want to be in that position. And find out too things about restaurants, like what's the dining time, because evening events. Say you're going to have all your attendees go for a dine around to different restaurants. In some countries, you won't want to be dining until 9 or 10 p.m. And if you're the American wanting to come in at 6:30 or 7, you're going to have the restaurant to yourself. And that may or may not be a good thing. Your attendees may want to be more like locals and go later. Just know those things.
Well, and if I can interject real quick, Laurie,
yeah.
I had that awful experience where you do not want to be the only one to show up. There was a miscommunication of when we could come in for our dinner and when they would actually be open to serve. So I went to advance the restaurant and nobody was there. And normally I go about 30 to 45 minutes before my group would come. And I mean, there were no chefs there. There was one person and they're like, well, we don't open, for an hour and a half.
Oh my God.
So then, I had to kind of think of a plan B of doing a reception in the hotel lobby with, for all the attendees while we waited so we could, get there. So again, they wanted to eat a little bit earlier. It wasn't even possible. And that miscommunication, caused a lot of last minute scrambling. So again, double checking that and making sure that you're accommodated at the time that they will accommodate you.
That's excellent, Brooke. Thank you for that. Because then going along with that, just make sure too that what you're expecting at a restaurant or an evening function is what they're providing. So like one thing that I learned a long time ago is if I'm in Europe and I'm talking to the hotel or the restaurant about the dinner service, typically outside of the US, coffee is going to be served after dessert. So what ends up happening is you have a lot of Americans sitting around with a beautiful dessert and they're saying, where's coffee? Where's coffee? They don't want to eat dessert because they're waiting for their coffee. In much of the world, they're going to clear the dessert and then they're going to bring coffee. So that's the kind of thing you have to walk through with the hotel or the restaurant and say, no, we know it's unusual for you, but we're going to ask you to please serve the coffee with the dessert. And they're getting more used to Americans, but that's something that you need to walk through. And then also, for security and risk assessment, just find out if there's any kind of strike planned. That's very, very common. You'll get to, maybe it's the day before you're leaving or something and you go, oh my gosh, I'm heading to Frankfurt tomorrow with a group and Lufthansa is planning a strike. Oh my God, on my arrival day. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Find those things out in advance. Find out in advance, is there going to be a rail strike? Is there going to be a hotel strike?
Or a taxi strike.
A taxi strike.
I've had a taxi strike on departure day, and it was a small meeting, so we didn't have ground transportation organized. We were just going to have everyone take taxis. And, people needed to get out, but, I had some of the drivers that were just, they couldn't drive and they were too scared to drive, even the privatized drivers. So, we had to work out a plan B, which was, thankfully, we had somebody who was local in our meeting and they were able to take some attendees to the airport. But I mean, again, it kind of came out of nowhere and we just had to figure out a way to react in a positive manner that still made the attendees feel safe, right? And getting them out as well. So,
yeah, good one. Right. And you'll want to know too, like, depending on where you're going, what's the terrorism level? There are certain parts of Europe where they're always on very heightened alert. Know about that. And if a lot of companies have their own security details that they'll bring when you go to Europe, and some companies are too small, they don't. Hire somebody if you really feel like you need it. You will not regret it. I always have security when we go to Europe for, a 10-person meeting. I wouldn't hire a security guy for, or security person, I should say. But if it's, over a certain number of people, you want security. Then the last thing I'll say is on this slide, you see right in the center, Culture Shock. This is a fantastic series of books that I get, depending on what country I'm going to. It really walks you through customs and etiquette of that country. It's not your typical travel guide. It's not photos. It's not going to tell you the best museums to go to and the best time to go. Nothing like that. This is about culture. And, this whole idea of know what you're walking into, this is really going to save you. So to kind of wrap this up, Brooke and I feel that our jobs as planners, we're not here to be order takers. We don't work at McDonald's. We don't just shoot through a Whopper order. We're here to be strategic advisors. And that's why our clients hire us. They know that we will use our experience and our expertise, and we will guide them to make decisions anywhere in the world. Everyone knows that, you could do the same meeting, the same group of people, the same hotel every year, year after year. There are so many variables, so many things could change. It's going to be different every year. And you know what? You're not going to think of everything, but you're just there to handle the situation as best you can. Use your guidance of your local expertise, the DMC, the hotel, whoever you have locally. Let them help you and guide you so you can guide your client and you exceed their expectations.
Great, thank you.